What's going on, everybody? It's Tawan Spencer, and welcome to another episode of the Lion's Heart Podcast, Mental and Emotional Navigation for Men. And today we're going to talk about a polarizing topic. Everybody's discussing it. You see videos, memes, everything shared about it. The gender wars. These gender wars have had a crazy impact on how we view each other. And I always thought that it was important that we have a real understanding of where this came from, roles, societal norms, how this has overall impacted not only how we think, but how we treat each other. Gender Wars, the Lion Hearts Podcast, Season 1, Episode 3. Let's get into it.
Like we define it fair, yeah. I know you needed me to be better. Supposed to be raised off of love, but survival.
Once you have a conversation with somebody and you introduce them to a different reality, the mentality changes.
Now look, I cried when I wrote this song, cause I feel I do right, just to right my wrongs.
So, the $1,000,000 question, what is the gender wars? What is this even about? And what I found is why so many of us have a side. We don't really understand what's going on. We just know somebody over there says something we don't like. We have an opinion about it. But what exactly are the gender wars? Well, when we're talking about gender wars, we're talking about social discourse. Essentially, what are the roles, the requirements, the expectations of the genders, male and women? What are they expecting from each other? Where it gets tricky at is some of us see it as a war of competition instead of cooperation. And that's kind of the life that it's taken on. And this ultimately gets fueled by media, expectations or experiences that we've had as individuals. And now with the advent of social media, everybody with an idea or feelings can come online and share this information. Now, let me say this as we move forward. I'm not okay with taking your experiences and using them to hurt anybody. So there's a lot of people that's like the gender wars thing needs to stop in its entirety. I don't agree with that. I think we need to have solutions and be goal-oriented when we have these conversations, because these are how men feel. These are how women feel. We just haven't had a platform, and now that we do, I think what we're seeing is a whole lot of people exposing trauma, and we all have an abundance of that. So I could talk about what I felt like a woman did wrong, and a woman could talk about what she felt like a man did wrong, but the thing that's absent is solutions. We don't really speak on goals when we talk about what's going on with these gender wars. I feel like that's where the focus needs to happen at. And then the question becomes, is this even real conflict? Or is it a distraction from deeper issues? Stuff like systemic inequalities or maybe outdated expectations or gender rules and biases. Is it an escape from that and not really dealing with real issues in our communities, in our nation, and across the world? So here's some key points. Modern movements like feminism or men's right activism, those things are very real and they bring very valid concerns. The problem is the polarization of this type of topic. It's become more about clicks and more about likes. And since it's so trauma-inducing and trauma-filled, usually when we have these conversations, the reaction is that of somebody who's uncomfortable because of an emotional thing. So it blows up from that space. And we talk about how we feel and what we don't like, but there's an absence of created solutions. Another thing is social media kind of promotes us versus them. This creates divides, which this has happened throughout the history of any form of media. You create we got to go against them. They're not right. We're right. Instead of creating an environment where everybody sits down and really tries to come to a conclusion. Healthy relationships require mutual respect and consideration, not rivalry. They do not require rivalry. Respect and communication, not rivalry. Now listen, let's talk about the media. When has it ever been about healthy respect and communication as a mainstream conduit? So you got to understand, when we talk about the gender wars, I think the energy and the focus of it should probably be redirected. I want to give you guys some things to look into when looking at what the gender wars is and how there might be information that might be misleading us when we approach these type of topics and conversations. The first one is The Gender Brain by Gina Rippin. Okay? The gender brain. I like this book because it debunks myths about the male and female brain. It takes away any misconceptions about how we actually focus and function as individuals. The second is, if you can get online, look up the Pew Research Center, PEW Research Center. And I'm saying this because I want you to be able to actually look at research and documents and things of that nature that actually talk about various studies on gender roles and societal attitudes. It's important to have really clear foundational information. Now that we got a deeper understanding of the gender wars, I want to talk about the root causes of this conflict. What's actually going on that's creating the problem? More importantly, why does a gender war exist? So the first thing that I would tell anybody to consider are cultural shifts, right? Over the last century or so, gender roles have drastically changed, all right? What your grandma used to do back in the day isn't necessarily a widespread goal for women today. Same thing with the expectations of men. So these norms that we've kind of upheld as a society, they don't match how we feel today, and that's where the clash is coming from. The other thing is economic pressures. Money. Cost of living has went up. There's a decline in what we viewed as the traditional family, and the lack and the change of these things also lead to stress. So what happens is we end up blaming each other, because any other outside forces that could be influencing these situations, we don't have access to. So you lash out on what's close to you. And another thing is communication barriers. Men and women often approach issues differently. And when we communicate these things poorly, we essentially fuel a higher level of misunderstanding between the two of us. And now, because we don't really understand each other and we're still trying to talk, we're speaking to issues that don't really address anything that the other person might have going on. And I always think of something that my grandmother used to tell me all the time when I was having conversations. There is a difference between having a conversation with someone and listening to respond and listening to actually absorb information. As soon as we hear something that we don't like, we speak, we overtalk, we disrespect each other. And the reality is, I know how I feel. Whenever I engage in a conversation with somebody, the goal is to develop a deeper understanding of how they feel. This is something that we got to remember, especially when we're having personal conversations. Here's a key thought for you. We need to shift it from blaming one another to actually considering how external forces create the realities for the people that we're talking about. Because a lot of us feel like because we can't relate to what the other person is saying, it takes away from the validity of it, or because we don't believe it to be true, we don't have to focus on that. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. That's the furthest thing from the truth. And I'll give you an example. It would be like me telling you that my leg hurt in a certain area and you deciding that whatever happened shouldn't have hurt my leg, so you don't have to treat that thing that I'm talking about seriously. The problem with that becomes, just because you don't view it as a big deal does not change the pain that I feel. It does not change any trauma that may have come from those experiences. It doesn't rid me of anything that's actually happened. So when we treat each other like that, when we disregard what's being expressed, people naturally respond to this. Even though it's a fear, even though it's a hurt, the anger comes out because we're less vulnerable in that state. So it's important that we really prioritize understanding other struggles while consciously understanding that just because I can't relate, just because I haven't seen that, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And then having the right heart posture. I really want to know how I can help women feel more comfortable. And I want to have conversations with women that are interested in trying to figure out how they can make this world easier for me to navigate in. If we're having conversations with each other and those aren't the heart postures, the conversations are doomed from the start. The resource that I'm going to actually recommend is Brene Brown's TED Talk. I don't know if you guys are hip to watching these TED Talks, but they're basically a platform where different individuals with different ideas get on there and they share how they feel. Brown has one that is incredibly, you just got to go listen to it. What she talks about is how vulnerability fosters various connections and relationships, but that also means we have to be comfortable with vulnerability. And listen, we show love to everybody, so one I would recommend a podcast to go check out is the Man Enough podcast. I don't know if you guys are hip, but go check them out. They have frequent conversations about redefining masculinity, and I always recommend that you guys go hear that, because, you know, some of the stuff that might have worked when your grandfather was in his heyday may not work for you. So it's important to go get different mentalities, to go have different authentic conversations, and to hear individuals that's really concerned with having a positive impact give you the game. So go check them out, Man Enough Podcast.
Hey there, listeners. Are you ready to unleash your inner lion and embark on a transformative journey? Let me introduce you to the Lion's Heart Mental and Emotional Navigation by me, Tawan Spencer. This isn't just a book. It's a 31-day guide crafted to help men set daily goals and incorporate mindfulness, social, emotional, spiritual, and wellness practices into their daily lives. Each day offers practical steps to strengthen your mental resilience, enhance your emotional intelligence, deepen your spiritual connection, and improve your overall wellness. Imagine transforming your life, becoming the best version of you, and truly embodying the heart of a lion. Are you ready to take that first step? The Lion's Heart is available now, yes, right now on Amazon. Don't just read, ignite a movement within yourself.
So next, with all of those things discussed, the major question becomes, how do we move forward? How do we navigate this so-called war and build bridges instead of walls? So I figured out 3 key steps that I believe if we practice, we could see a shift in the overall goal of what these conversations are about and these mentalities and these ideologies are in the first place. Step 1 would be to practice empathy. Seek to understand the lived experiences of the other gender, regardless of what they're saying and without judgment. Seek to understand. So I'm listening to learn, not to respond. And here's something that I feel like if you take this in, it'll make it so much easier. Seeking to understand or practicing empathy does not mean agreement. Just because I'm trying to understand you does not mean I agree. Remove the pressure from yourself of because I understand I'm with it. That's not what that means. That's not what that means. I cannot relate to some of the pressures and frustrations that women have, but acting like they don't have those pressures will not help us come any closer. The second is to redefine what strength actually is. Strength is not about dominance. It's about resiliency and vulnerability. Listen to what I said. Strength is not about dominance. It's about resiliency and vulnerability. Resilient means to be able to bounce back no matter what's happening. And vulnerability is, to me, one of the strongest things you can actually be. It takes an incredibly strong person to allow themselves to be vulnerable in front of somebody else. I don't care nothing about the flexing and doing all that extra stuff online. Vulnerable people are some of the strongest people that you will ever meet because they found a way to take their emotions, acknowledge them, and still be expressive towards other individuals. We got to redefine what strength looks like. And here's the exciting thing. When I see chaos like this, it means an opportunity. As men, we get to remodel what this stuff looks like. We get a chance to wipe the slate clean and really talk about what this stuff looks and feels like. We have an opportunity to educate and teach our women, to teach our children, to teach society as a whole, hey, here's what it looks like. That's an amazing place to be at. And the third thing that I would recommend is to build shared goals. We got to have a plan of what we want to happen. Both of us, men and women. And what that means is instead of talking about who had it worse, which is a redundant conversation in the first place, we could work together for like actual shared goals. This is understanding. This is empathy. This is equity. This is providing healthy directions for those that's coming up after us. We can identify shared goals in this process so we can get to where we got to get to. What are some recommendations that I have that fit this area? Okay. I would recommend The Way of Superior Man by David Dida. And this is essentially a guide for men to balance strength and emotional intelligence because it's important that we have a distinction between the two so we can get to where we're trying to get to in life and in our relationships. So what do I have to say in conclusion after giving all of that information? Here it is. The gender war isn't a battle to be won, but a challenge to be understood. The gender war is not a battle to be won, but a challenge to be understood. If we focus on mutual respect, communication, and shared goals, we can turn this conflict into a connection. And listen, that's super important because it's not just about us that's engaging in this stuff right now. The habits, the ideologies, the things that we practice, this next generation, they're going to say it's okay. So if you can't do it for you, if you can't do it to communicate better with your partner, because you might be in a place where that just seems impossible for you, look at your kids. Look at the people that look up to you, the people that actually are coming after you, and that takes everything you say as law. Are we creating an environment where we're going to be comfortable with what they turn into? Are we going to be happy about what we leave behind for these people? Understand that if we want to see change, we have to be the things that do it. If this episode resonated with you, gave you information, and helped you feel a little bit clearer on what you're dealing with as far as the gender war, like it, share it, send it to your people. Let's create a conversation, man, where we start to look at this different. And more importantly, and I'm saying this as somebody who's on YouTube, this might get me in trouble with a couple channels, but hold people accountable. Hold people accountable for actually making change. Let's not just make content that's polarizing or exciting. If we really trying to see this thing change, what can we do? What are actionable steps to start the change that will end up making a difference in everybody that's involved? What will those changes look like? What are our roles and how do we make it happen, y'all? I appreciate you for taking time to tune in. This was the Lion's Heart Podcast, Season 1, Episode 3, and I'm out. Love y'all. Peace.